What we know is a drop. What we don't know is an ocean. Isaac Newton really nailed it with that one, didn't he?
He certainly did. It captures so much.
Because today we're diving into something that feels just like that. Vast, complex, full of hidden depths. We're talking about the succession of the 15th Dalai Lama.
Right. A really big topic.
Yeah, and it's not just about faith, is it? It's this really intricate geopolitical puzzle. It's got history, international law, human rights, all tangled up.
Absolutely.
So for anyone looking to really get a handle on the forces shaping our world, maybe you're prepping for exams or you just want to be genuinely well-informed, this is pretty essential stuff.
Exactly. And that's what this deep dive is for. We want to help you unpack all those layers. You know, the historical claims, the legal angles, the cultural identity side, religious freedom.
All based on the sources we've got.
Precisely. The goal, like always, is to cut through the noise, pull out the key insights from the material you've shared, and make sure you've got a solid grasp of this pivotal moment, whether it's for exams or just, sheer curiosity about global affairs.
Okay, let's unpack this then. The timing itself seems, fascinating. The Dalai Lama making this announcement about his succession plans so early, July 2nd, right? 4 whole days before his 90th birthday. It feels like he's trying to get ahead of Beijing. Is that what's happening? Is he trying to corner them?
Oh, it's definitely a deliberate move. Very shrewd, I'd say. Aimed squarely at, stopping Beijing from interfering where they shouldn't.
In his view?
In his view, and according to Tibetan tradition, he was really explicit. The nonprofit Gaden Phodrang Trust, which he set up, has the sole authority, that's the key word, sole authority to recognize his reincarnation.
And it has to be done in a specific way.
Yes, in consultation with the heads of the various Tibetan Buddhist traditions. And he said, quite directly, no one else has any such authority to interfere in this matter.
Strong words.
Very. And he also mentioned, this wasn't just out of the blue. It came after years of appeals from Tibetans in the diaspora, Buddhists around the world who were, as he put it, earnestly requesting that the institution of the Dalai Lama continue.
Right, so there was pressure from his own community too. And this isn't exactly a new position for him, is it? He's been saying similar things for a while.
Absolutely not new. He's been very consistent. If you go back to 2011, he made it crystal clear. His successor should be found in a free country, not under Chinese control.
That's a crucial distinction.
Crucial. And he explained why, very directly. He pointed to China's re-education campaign and their strategy to just name their own 15th Dalai Lama after he passes away. He called it outrageous and disgraceful.
Did he quote them?
He did. He said, "They say they are waiting for my death and will recognize a 15th Dalai Lama of their choice." And then, just this past March, in his book Voice for the Voiceless, he doubled down, adding his successor would be born outside China.
So not just outside Tibet as a geographical place, but specifically outside the political control of China. That's a powerful line to draw.
It really is. And, what makes this even stronger is that it's not like this hasn't happened before. There's historical precedent within their own tradition.
Oh, really? Like when?
Well, the 4th Dalai Lama, Yonten Gyatso, born in Mongolia way back in 1589, and the 6th, Sangyen Gyatso, born in what's now Arunachal Pradesh in India, the Montawang area, back in 1683.
Ah, interesting. So the idea of a Dalai Lama born outside Tibet isn't radical from their perspective.
Not at all. It's historically sound within Tibetan Buddhism, and crucially, it completely undermines Beijing's argument that the reincarnation has to be found inside Chinese-controlled territory. It just pulls the rug out from under their narrative.
Okay, so the Dalai Lama makes his move. A clear statement, rooted in tradition, preemptive. How did Beijing respond? I mean, given their stance on Tibet, it can't have been quiet.
Swift, predictable, and completely unwavering. That's how Beijing reacted. They consistently frame the Dalai Lama as a separatist, someone undermining their sovereignty over Tibet.
Right, that's been their line for decades.
Exactly. And their demand is absolute. Any successor must get the stamp of approval from the Chinese government, and they have to follow Chinese laws and, interestingly, Chinese interpretations of religious traditions.
How specific did they get?
Very specific. The Foreign Ministry spokeswoman, Mao Ning, stated point blank that the reincarnation must be approved by the central government. And she mentioned it has to be chosen by drawing lots from a golden urn.
The golden urn method. Where does that come from?
It refers to an 18th century Qing dynasty practice that China now holds up as the only legitimate method. It's their historical hook, and they keep repeating the description of the Dalai Lama as, quote, a political exile who is engaged in anti-China separatist activities under the cloak of religion. always linking it back to his flight to India in 1959.
So they're using history, or their version of it, and religious procedure to basically cement their control.
Yeah.
Have they put this into law?
Oh, absolutely. This fits right into their broader long-term strategy, consolidating total control over all religious institutions inside China, especially Tibetan Buddhism. They've brought in some pretty strict measures. The big one is Order Number 5.
Order number 5.
Yeah, or its full name. The management measures for the reincarnation of living Buddhas in Tibetan Buddhism, passed by their State Administration of Religious Affairs, SARA, back in 2007, went into effect September 1st that year.
Living Buddhas, that's the term they use. For tulkus.
Yes, that's their official terminology for a tulku, a reincarnated lama. And Order Number 5 lays it all out. It basically says only the state can search for and recognize a tulku. No unauthorized groups or individuals allowed.
So the religious community itself is cut out.
Effectively, yes, unless sanctioned by the state. It explicitly states, reincarnating living Buddhas shall not be interfered with or be under the dominion of any foreign organization or individual. And here's a key part. These living Buddhas lose their status if they leave China.
Wow. So the implication is huge.
It's enormous. For China, any Buddhist lineage outside the PRC, invalid. Any reincarnation chosen without their... Okay, illegal or invalid. It's not just about control. It's like they're trying to legally rewrite spirituality itself.
Creating a state-approved version of Buddhism.
Precisely. Their rules, their Buddhas, their way. It completely dismisses centuries of autonomous religious tradition.
That level of state control over something so deeply spiritual, it's bound to cause ripples internationally. When you have a spiritual leader making such a clear move and world power responding by trying to legislate religion, how are others reacting? What about the U.S. and the EU?
Well, it's safe to say China's stance isn't winning international acceptance. The U.S., for instance, has taken a very firm line. They passed the Tibet Policy and Support Act in December 2020.
Right, I remember that. What does it say specifically?
It explicitly states that deciding the Dalai Lama's reincarnation is up to the Tibetan Buddhist system, the Dalai Lama himself, and other Tibetan leaders. Crucially, not any government.
So, directly challenging China's claim, does it have teeth?
It does. It includes provisions for sanctions against any Chinese officials who try to interfere in identifying a future Dalai Lama. Things like asset freezes, being denied entry to the U.S.
Okay, so that's a clear red line from Washington.
A very clear one. And the State Department is supposed to work with other countries, like-minded nations, to build a united front against China's plans on this.
Has there been follow-up?
Yes, multiple times. There were bills reaffirming this policy in Congress and the Senate in 2022 and 2021. Section 3307 of the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act actually calls any interference by the Chinese government a clear abuse of the right to religious freedom.
Strong language again.
And recently, just this July 2024, President Biden signed the Bipartisan Resolve Tibet Act. Plus, you had that high-profile U.S. congressional delegation with Nancy Pelosi meeting the Dalai Lama in Dharamshala in June 2024. It signals ongoing high-level support.
So the U.S. is definitely active, legislatively and diplomatically. What's the European position? Are they mirroring the U.S.?
Well, this really brings up that big question, doesn't it? How much impact can international law and diplomatic pressure actually have on a country's claims about its own sovereignty? The EU hasn't gone as far as creating specific laws with sanctions like the U.S. No individual member state has. But the EU, as a bloc, they have consistently reaffirmed their position.
Which is?
That China should respect the 14th Dalai Lama's succession process according to Tibetan Buddhist tradition. So while the method differs from the U.S. no specific sanctions legislation, the underlying message is similar. It's a collective pushback from another major global player, emphasizing religious freedom and Tibetan cultural identity against China's control attempts.
Interesting. Different tactics, same underlying principle. Now let's turn to India. This must put India in a really unique, maybe tricky position. They've been hosting the Dalai Lama for over 60 years. How does this whole succession issue play out for them, especially with their own complicated relationship with China?
It's an incredibly delicate balancing act for India, no doubt about it. The official line is straightforward enough. The Dalai Lama is an honored guest given asylum for his spiritual activities.
But not political ones.
Yeah, exactly. His administration in exile, the Central Tibetan Administration, or Akashag, operates from Dharamsala, but they're not supposed to engage in political activity on Indian soil. Now, on the succession plan itself, India hasn't made any recent explicit public statement.
But you sense a shift.
There seems to be a subtle but noticeable shift in public posture. Prime Minister Modi, for example, unlike many predecessors, has been open about talking to the Dalai Lama. He's publicly exchanged birthday greetings.
Small gestures, but maybe significant.
Potentially very significant in diplomatic terms. And he also warmly met that U.S. congressional delegation when they visited Dharamshala recently, another signal. Plus, and this is quite interesting, in recent official talks, India hasn't been explicitly reaffirming the one China principle.
Which Beijing definitely wouldn't like.
Exactly. It suggests, perhaps, a growing confidence in Delhi, maybe a quiet recalibration of how they approach the Tibet issue in relation to China.
So it sounds like India is navigating this carefully, avoiding direct confrontation, but also subtly signaling its own position and its support for the Dalai Lama. Has his presence actually been beneficial for India, despite the potential friction with China?
You know, looking back, it's fascinating. The argument can strongly be made that the Dalai Lama's presence has been a boon, not a bane for India.
How so?
Well, first, it significantly boosts India's international image. A large democratic nation offering refuge to someone fleeing an authoritarian regime that carries weight. It speaks to values.
Soft power, in a way.
Absolutely. And then there's the practical side. The Tibetan refugee community in India, around 200,000 people, they're largely self-sufficient, known for being entrepreneurial, they haven't caused major law and order issues, and crucially, they haven't pushed for Indian citizenship. Their hope remains returning to Tibet if genuine autonomy is ever possible. That relieves India of certain pressures.
Right, that challenges the narrative you sometimes hear about refugees being solely a burden.
Yeah.
It shows how offering asylum based on principles can have tangible, positive outcomes, too.
Exactly. It's a real-world example of that. And beyond the political and practical, you just can't ignore the incredibly deep historical and cultural connections between India and Tibet.
You mean beyond just hosting the Dalai Lama?
Oh, much deeper. Think about it. Two of the most sacred Hindu pilgrimage sites, Mount Kailash and Lake Manasarovar, are in Tibet. Tibet is the source of major rivers flowing into India. The Indus, the Brahmaputra, the Sutlej.
The lifeblood for millions.
Precisely. And the Dalai Lama himself often talks about ancient links. He's mentioned Tibetan lineage, tracing back to a South Indian king, Rupati, or the Tibetan royal line, starting with a prince from Magadha, which is modern-day Bihar.
So these are deep civilizational ties.
Very deep. There was even a prominent Tibetan activist, Losang Sering, who gave a speech back in 2000 called India's Tibet, a case for policy review. He argued passionately for Tibet to be considered India's Tibet, not China's Tibet. He used this powerful analogy
What was it?
about Prince Siddhartha saving a swan's life versus Prince Devadatta claiming it because he shot it, implying India represents the life-preserving connection, while China represents, well, conquest.
That's a stark image. And it really throws China's historical claims into question, doesn't it? You mentioned the Qing dynasty earlier, but if they claim Tibet based on the Mongol Empire.
Right. If Genghis Khan annexing Tibet in the 13th century makes Tibet Chinese, then logically, China should be part of Mongolia.
Exactly. Why stop there? Why not claim parts of Russia, Europe, the Middle East that were also under Mongol rule?
It highlights the selectivity, doesn't it? History gets weaponized to fit current political goals. And it ignores Tibet's own history.
Like when Tibet was a major power.
Exactly. In the 8th century, the Tibetan Empire was so strong, the Chinese emperor fled his capital. They even put their own nominee on the Chinese throne for a while. Peace only came with a treaty in 821 AD that explicitly defined the borders between China and Tibet.
A treaty defining separate entities.
Correct. And even much later, look at the British perspective until 1947, or the Soviet view until 1990. The prevailing idea was that Tibet fell within India's sphere of influence.
That's a historical perspective you don't often hear emphasized. And perhaps the most critical point for India today, the Dalai Lama's stance on the border.
That's hugely significant. The fact that the Dalai Lama himself openly recognizes the McMahon Line as the legitimate border between India and Tibet.
The very line China disputes so fiercely.
Exactly. That recognition from him provides invaluable support for India's position in its ongoing, often tense boundary negotiations with China. It's a massive diplomatic asset.
So wrapping it up, Tibet isn't just a sideshow in Sino-Indian relations. It's a core factor.
Absolutely. India can't just ignore the Dalai Lama, the Tibetan community on its soil, or the deep feelings involved. Stability and tranquility in Tibet are very much in India's national interest.
Wow. This deep dive really shows just how many layers there are. It's religious, yes, but it's intensely geopolitical, deeply historical, and profoundly humanitarian all at the same time. Understanding this whole picture is, well, it's vital for anyone trying to make sense of global power shifts right now. Especially, I think, for those preparing for exams that require understanding these international complexities.
Completely agree. And this geopolitical chess game, as we called it, it's really far from over. The moves being made now, the decisions by all these players, they're going to reverberate for years, shaping relationships across Asia and, frankly, globally.
So here's a final thought for you, our listeners, to mull over. As you think about everything we've discussed, the clash over religious freedom, the competing historical narratives, the assertions of national sovereignty, how might the eventual succession of the Dalai Lama set a precedent? Could it influence how other culturally distinct regions, maybe those seeking more autonomy or even self-determination, deal with larger, dominant powers?
That's a big question.
It is. What could this mean for the future of international law, for human rights? How might it redraw alliances or shift global dynamics? This is exactly the kind of complex, multi-layered issue that gives you that crucial edge in understanding global affairs, whether you're facing tough exams or you simply want to be truly informed about the world.
Definitely food for thought.
So if you found this deep dive valuable, please do give us a like, subscribe to the channel for more discussions like this, and definitely leave a comment. Let us know your questions or suggest other topics you'd like us to tackle next. Your engagement really helps us keep digging into these critical issues.